Welcome back, everybody, into Bill's Chat. I am Josh McCarty. With me, as always, is Luka. Luka, how are you doing tonight?
It's good to be back. It's good to be back. It's been a couple weeks now. We both had things going on where we were just too busy doing our own things and had to just step aside for a second. We missed a little bit of a free agency wrap up period. We will do that tonight, obviously, and I know you were going to get into that, but I'm happy to be back in the chair. I'm happy to be in front of the camera, behind the mic, whatever you want to call it. Talk a little bit Bills and shift all of our focus on my favorite time of the year, Josh.
It is that time of year, and this is our last episode before we get to draft month because
Hell
in
yeah.
just a few days it'll be April, and that means draft month is here. You can start to taste it this time of year, and that's what we want to do tonight. Is we kind of want to put a bow on free agency with an eye on the draft, and we want to take a look at all these moves that Brandon Beane and the Bills have made in free agency and really figure out, have they impacted the needs of the Bills heading into the draft? Let's reset our opinion of what the Bills draft needs are. Is wide receiver still priority number one if it was before for you? What about the defensive tackle situation? The Bills added a guy there. How are you feeling about the offensive line? The Bills have lost a couple guys there and made one somewhat notable addition there. At least the guy has a notable name. And otherwise, what we're gonna do is we're just gonna get into a bunch of different position groups tonight. We're going to talk about what the Bills have done. This will be a great way to kind of give our thoughts on the players the Bills have added while also taking it forward, looking at the draft and seeing what impacts the Bills could do. Luka, to kick this off, to kick this conversation off, I want to ask you, because we know Brandon Beane's goal in free agency, if he can accomplish it, is to not go into the draft with any glaring needs to the point where he can go best player available whenever his team is on the clock. Now, it's not always possible. There was the year that they had a dying need for a cornerback and they had to trade up and get Kyer Elam. And, you know, the NFL is tricky in that way. You don't always know how you're going to be able to fill those holes. Is there a starter on the Bills right now as it sits on March 25th when this episode drops that is so concerning to you that if the season started today, you'd say that is a weakness I cannot get over?
Hold on for a second. So it's funny because safety is the one position where I go, man, I'm scratching my head if I'm truly comfortable with anything going on there, where I would almost highlight the position in the upcoming draft. But maybe that's where I leave it, where you highlight it, right? That could be a tiebreaker situation where immediate need is there. But we've said it in years past, Josh, and we will continue, I imagine, to say it this year. It is one of those things where you said it leading into this. We've said it in the past. All of those things, you never draft for immediate need. That is not how you do it, especially with your blue chips. With your blue chips, what you're doing with those is you're drafting for best value on the board, best player available, all of those things. And there isn't anything there. The only time an organization should truly do something in that manner where it makes sense and should be justified is what you see in those top three picks in those top three slots, where those are going to be franchise quarterbacks. I mean, those organizations have made that abundantly clear. Two of them trading away guys who were starting last year for 6th round picks. The Bears screwing that one up a little bit on their end.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But overall, drafting a franchise quarterback is realistically the only way you truly do that. The other situation where you do that based on need, where it just all of a sudden works out as well. Let's, for this purpose and example, the Cardinals at 4. If first 3 picks are going to be quarterbacks off the board and you somehow find yourself in a need of wide receiver, well, it just so happens that this guy that's also best player available, potentially best player in the draft, Marvin Harrison Jr., is just there on a silver platter for you. Those are realistically the only situations you're doing that. From there, especially in the case of the Bills and teams in the later parts of the draft, they may have needs. They may be able to address them in the draft. It just might not come in that blue chip moment because you have other individuals that are truly the best player available. And I think that's where the Bills stand, even with the current roster after the first wave of free agency.
You know, safety's interesting. You brought up safety. I have a hard time seeing the Bills drafting somebody that would come in and take snaps away from Taylor Rapp and Mike Edwards. I'm not the biggest Taylor Rapp guy. I thought, you know, he had a great interception to end the season. I think he played well in the first Dolphins game. I think he's got some limited range to his game, but I do think that I trust Sean McDermott's eyes when it comes to evaluating defensive backs. And Taylor Rapp's a guy that has experience in his system. I think Mike Edwards is going to fit this defense like a glove. He was a very strong addition to me. He's a guy that when you look at what the Bills ask their players to do, you hear Sean McDermott say all the time, do your 111th. This is a guy that is just so technically sound. He's always where he's supposed to be. Now, look, when you're evaluating a safety, there's two boxes you check. Are you an athletic freak? Are you like a Jamal Adams who can run like a running back? Or are you somebody that, more like a Micah Hyde, maybe not the high end athlete, but you're just always where you're supposed to be? Mike Edwards is not the athletic freak, but he's never going to be out of place. He's never going to get you beat by having him out there. And I think he's somebody that this fan base is going to fall in love with. And then they still have Cam Lewis and DeMar Hamlin. What I have done though, Luka, I've put together a list of 7 positions that I think we can rule out the Bills taking with their first or second pick in this draft. Remember, they do not have a 3rd round pick. They traded that away for Rasul Douglas, and the NFL decided to flip the Bills a big middle finger on the compensatory formula and only give them a 4th for Tremaine Edmonds instead of a 3rd. Brandon Beane spoke about that at the owners meetings or the league meetings, and he did not understand it either. I think, Luka, let me know. I'm going to go through these positions, and when I'm done, let me know if you agree or if there's any ones you want to raise your hand and say, well, I could see a scenario. 7 positions. Some of them are kind of obvious. 1st and 2nd round. Quarterback, running back, tight end, linebacker, kicker, punter, long snapper. Yeah. The last 3 I just wanted to blow through.
Long snapper's the best one.
Yeah. You never know.
Your 39 overall tight end that Madden has to put in there somehow because you need a long snapper.
What would it take for a long snapper to go on day 2? Like he would just, I can't even imagine a scenario.
You would have to actually be this weird combination of a beautiful long snapper, just a perfect pro type long snapper, but also actually could be productive. You could actually be the first ever long snapper in Madden that's rated 70 or higher.
You're also a shutdown corner.
Yeah, you're actually like a number 2 tight end in the league. Like you actually do a really good job on edge blocks for running and stuff. You're like something of that nature. It's like, oh wow, this guy. Yeah, no, but that list makes sense. I would be obviously quarterback would be a head scratcher in the 1st or 2nd round. Running back, we've had discussions about the position. This is a year. I'll put it in the context of this year's draft. Not many running backs are really eye-catching at this point in time. I think I had one in my latest version of my big board. Maybe I think I squeaked into. There's a lot of guys where you look at them where they're round 2, 3, 4. Like, and you really don't know where they fit particularly. They have some upside to them, but yeah, the Bills, in the case of what they have going on, when you have James Cook, it doesn't truly make that much sense with everything going on. Tight end, we definitely don't need another blue chip tight end. You have a beautiful prospect in Kincaid. You have Dawson Knox in that whole situation. And linebacker, somehow, some way has found itself to be a very very strong position group. After spending 2 consecutive drafts in day 2, drafting a linebacker, you now sit in a decent spot right now and then kicker, punter, long snapper. I mean, those just go without saying, Josh. So I think that list all makes sense.
Linebacker's interesting because Terrell Bernard and Matt Milano could honestly be the 2 best players on the defense. Like by the time the season ends, that could be how we look at it. Like Taron Johnson would have something to say about that, depending on what happens with Von Miller, Ed Oliver. Like, there's going to be some guys that have a chance to enter that conversation. Greg Rousseau, maybe Rasul Douglas, but and then what the Bills have done though is I think they've built a very solid linebacker group. They did lose Tyrell Dodson. Good for him. He got a decent sized contract from the Seahawks, I believe, and went with Leslie Frazier. But they had Dorian Williams, who they drafted last year. And, I think for a team that plays base nickel and they only need a 3rd linebacker on the field every so often, I think having Dorian Williams as your development guy that you believed in enough to take in the 3rd round is a really good idea. But the Bills did not put all of their chips in the Dorian Williams basket. They went out and got a guy with starting experience, both inside and outside, and on special teams with Nicholas Morrow. I think when that contract came out and it was very, very cheap, it was obvious at that point, even though the Dodson deal with Seattle hadn't been announced yet, that Dodson had priced himself out of the Bills' range. Good for him. Happy for him. Nicholas Morrow gives the Bills a floor of a veteran if Dorian Williams isn't ready. And then they still have Balin Spector on the roster, who's also developing going into his third year. Luka, I think the Bills are in very good shape at linebacker, and I would not be surprised, even though they have 11 picks, if they make it through this entire draft without taking a linebacker at all. I mean, it might get to a point where you get to round 5 or 6 and there's a guy on your board that's like got a high 4th round grade and you just can't pass it up. That's what happens on day 3. It's not so much about need at that point. It's just like that guy, we have him rated way too high to still be on the board. But I think the Bills right now, they have 5 guys that I think very comfortably are going to make this roster, and it's going to be hard for anybody. I mean, they're not going to draft. They could take a linebacker in the first round. He's not replacing Milano or Bernard. So that's not going to happen. And then, depth wise, they have their young guys in Williams and Spector. They got their veteran in Morrow. They're in fantastic shape, I think.
Oh, beautiful shape. I mean, as you said it, Milano and Bernard, and then I even put Williams in the category of just making yourself feel comfortable. Those 3 alone make you feel comfortable. Balin Spector is still a guy where they clearly like something with him and they're just figuring it out. You drafted him late day 3. It's not like this should be a surprise to anyone where he's at this point in his pro career. But overall, he's been around and he's been making, the 53-man roster since day 1. That they see something that they're comfortable with in him, as well as he provides special teams needs and stuff like that on a affordable wage that is controlled. So it's one of those things where when what we're talking about, the list of positions that we can rule out, right? You listed it in our notes as first and second round. I would say first, second, and maybe third round even. Those positions apply to me. Once you're in day 3, kind of even like you said, that kind of thought goes out the window. You are truly drafting best player available / just good value / you, as you even pointed out, wait a second, we're in deep round 6 and all of a sudden this guy that randomly was floating at the top of our 4th round board is just chilling right there. Oh, hey, look, it's some running back. It's like, yeah, sure, we'll take it. Like that's you're drafting pure value at that point. So, or at least what you perceive to be pure value. So the linebacker position, everything of that regard, they should feel very, very good about themselves to the point where it would be, I would imagine it would have to be that they were blown away by the position and also everything else just did not work out for them to draft a linebacker, say round 2 or 3, and 1 for that matter, just based on where they currently stand.
Let's talk about wide receiver. I think that's the position that's the elephant in the room. That's the position that I think the majority of Bills fans have pointed at all offseason as the position that needs to be upgraded. Gabe Davis left via free agency. We predicted that would happen. A lot of folks did for Jacksonville. The Bills released Deontay Hardy, and they are not bringing back Trent Sherfield. He is signed elsewhere, and I forgot where that even was.
He did.
They have signed. They went, I'd say, somewhat big fish hunting. They brought in Curtis Samuel on a 3-year deal. And then they also brought in Mac Hollins. So they have a couple of veterans, interesting body types. Mac Hollins is a little bit more of a big physical receiver, a special teams guy. Curtis Samuel is much more of that slot receiver. He played 71% of his snaps in the slot last season. Between him and Shakir, the Bills should really have that Cole Beasley role locked up. Samuel also is just a very good run after catch guy, quick separator, but very dangerous with the ball in his hands. Sometimes he looks like a running back even. Every receiver now wants to compare themselves to Deebo Samuel. That is not what Curtis Samuel is, but you can just tell, much like Deebo, he's got some running back in his game. But Luka, when you look at this wide receiver core top to bottom as it stands here in late March, you have Stephon Diggs coming off of what I think many would say is a fairly disappointing season as he went like the last 2 months without having a 100-yard game. Curtis Samuel, who is a solid addition. Khalil Shakir, who had a very good season, a very strong playoffs. Mac Hollins. And then you have Justin Shorter, the rookie last year that never saw the field. And then Andy Isabella, who was here a little bit off the practice squad, but he's back on the practice squad. Then you have names like Tyrell Shavers, Brian Thompson, and then KJ Hamler, who's actually an interesting flyer that the Bills got from the Broncos this offseason. But I have not moved off my spot that wide receiver should and will be priority one for this team, assuming value aligned itself with the first round pick. What say you?
Nothing they've done has even moved. It shouldn't have changed anything. Curtis Samuel is a positionless receiver in my mind. He's an OW. He's an offensive weapon. As you even pointed out, he can be used in a lot of ways. I think Brandon Beane even said it somewhere at some point that, he liked what he saw and he basically called him positionless. And that seems to be a theme that they like for the offense moving forward. They want guys that can do different things, be versatile in their usage, and can provide, more than just a singular, productive thing for this offense. The only guy, that truly does that is Diggs. And that's just because Diggs has been doing what he does at such a high level for so many years that he's just a true number one, or, has been. Ooh, man, that was a little bit of a past tense there that I somewhat regret. But moving on, you sign your Curtis Samuel, you sign Mac Hollins, you do those kinds of things. It's like, no, at the end of the day, based on the draft itself, and on top of it, where your actual roster is and what you project it to be for years to come, which is what you should also have in mind always with drafting that first and second round pick kind of deal. Receiver is the kind of focus. And we're going into year 2 essentially of this, going into the draft, where we want to see this team put an emphasis on a receiving talent, which they did technically last year as well in Dalton Kincaid, and it seems to be going fantastic. It's just now you need to find something that will move you forward at that wide receiver 1 spot, because Diggs, as we said, he showed a little bit of a downturn with what it is. In whatever capacity that might be, maybe he'll have that uptick at the beginning of next season, and then we'll see a steady decline once again. Maybe we'll see more notable decline, whatever it is. It's just you have to know and realize that at this point in time, there will be life after Diggs when you are still in the prime of Josh Allen's career, and you need to make sure that you have kind of that next man up situation for that. And this is a great time to have that, because you have guys that are like Brian Thomas Jr., and or people of that caliber that if this was any other draft, they're probably top 12, top 15 picks. And because of how deep this draft is, because of how many quarterbacks there are, and honestly, there are a lot of high-end offensive tackles that are decent in this draft, so on and so forth. Those kinds of guys like Brian Thomas Jr. could find themselves getting into the target range for Brandon Beane to make a move, if not falling even more so into their lap, that you can, just capitalize on that and move forward with a potential new number 1 down the road. So yeah, no move has happened at this point in time that should make anyone feel otherwise. That wide receiver is truly a top priority in this upcoming draft.
I'm with you. I like Curtis Samuel. I think he's a solid addition. I think it all sets up for the Bills to be very, very aggressive in addressing wide receiver in a few weeks in this draft. And you just have to kind of look under the hood. You talked about it. It's not all about 2024. And I'll say this, if the Bills were to start to see, let's say they go into the draft and they just don't take a wide receiver, they wait till the 5th or 6th round. I think this wide receiver group of Diggs, Curtis Samuel, Justin Shorter, and Khalil Shakir and Andy Isabella would be middle of the league. Like it would not be an upper echelon group at all. But when you look under the hood of the wide receiver position, you project it forward, like Luka said, in 2025, Stephon Diggs will turn 32. He also has an out in his contract that the Bills were very meticulous about not kicking the can down the road this offseason to allow that out to stay there. Curtis Samuel will be turning 29. That's not old, but that's not young. And Khalil Shakir will be entering his contract year. And Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have said before that as much as they like to run the ball, the passing game is this offense's fastball. Sean McDermott famously said when they signed Emmanuel Sanders, you do so because you don't want to lose your fastball. And I think it is time to find the next number 1 to pair with Josh Allen. When you go back to the Colts, when they had Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison was fantastic. When he started to slow down, they had Reggie Wayne ready to be there to be that number one. They were a great duo for a couple of years, but there was this time when Reggie Wayne started to pass Marvin Harrison. And, they didn't always get it right. They drafted Anthony Gonzalez in the first round too, and that was not much of a pick. But I think this is the perfect time for the Bills to add a blue chipper to the pipeline, to learn from Stephon Diggs. And the Bills have insulated themselves this year where if they take a player like Thomas, who you just outlined, and he comes in and for whatever reason, he's not ready to play every down. They have Curtis Samuel, they have Khalil Shakir, they have Stephon Diggs, they have Dalton Kincaid. They can get by. They can develop him at his own pace. If they take a guy and he's ready to come in and hit the ground running, you are not going to hold that blue chipper back because of Curtis Samuel or Khalil Shakir. And I think the Bills are in the perfect spot. And it's not just about 2024, Luka. It's about when 2025 comes around and Stephon Diggs is 32 and you're thinking about saying adios. You don't want Josh Allen's primary weapon, maybe outside of Dalton Kincaid, because that looks like it's going really, really well, to be somebody that's never caught a pass from Josh Allen. And the ideal situation would be this person that the Bills draft this year comes in as an instant contributor, looks like an instant weapon. And by the time next year rolls around, you feel like they have a chance to be the best weapon on this team. And that's why I think the Bills are going to absolutely prioritize it. Curtis Samuel be damned. I think that's a very, very good addition by the Bills. But unlike a lot of people who I respect in this space, I don't think that makes the Bills out of the wide receiver one market in round one at all.
No, it's the Curtis Samuel dynamic, or the addition of Curtis Samuel dynamic shifting focus at all. I just don't quite understand. And it's nothing to even do about the play type of them. And that's where I've seen some individuals or just people out there in general in discussion have said, it's like, it's you're only saying that because he's not a true outside guy and things like that. So you just want to still see that. It's like I'm not looking at it as this current roster going into the 2024 season needs another younger outside guy. That's not at all what it is. It's just looking down the road, as we keep saying here, the inevitable is happening. And you are just currently sitting in a situation that, unless the draft goes absolutely upside down and no one has any inkling of an idea of what truly is going to happen, and we get a insane run in the teens on receivers, you should be able to have an individual that you would think, being in this staff, will probably find as a first round grade falling to them in those 20s, where they can then be aggressive from there if they would like and go get that guy that then should be that impact player, both this season with all of these guys we like, but then as well as years to come. And it's kind of, I did see someone, I want to say it was on Twitter, and I'm not going to say their name because, one, I don't remember it, but two, I'm not even sure if it was on Twitter, but someone had brought up, I had basically made a comment about how, I would like to see that because we need to be focused on years down the road. And they're like, they essentially said, well, it didn't work out with Gabe Davis. It's like, you didn't draft Gabe Davis with that same mindset, nor with a blue chip draft opportunity like that. What Gabe Davis was something that really did work out in the end with that day. I think he was day 2, right? Yeah, I believe he was third round
pick.
Was he fourth round? Okay. Yeah. I knew it was that third, fourth area. Okay. So early day 3. And it was just one of those things where it just worked out in spades. Like, it was just, he was an impact out of the gate in his role. And then the hope was that you really found a gem for years to come if he could have expound on that, which then we know it was too inconsistent to really be that. You're drafting a guy in the first round like a Brian Thomas Jr., for instance. If that were to happen, I mean, it would be a shock to a lot of individuals if all of a sudden he was an impact, but then it didn't work out beyond that from his, in a Gabe Davis like way, where it was too inconsistent, or he just couldn't adjust to the pro level of being consistent on the outside boundary guy, stuff like that. The person you're drafting in the first round that you have a first round grade on, you did too much work to understand them to be potentially as something like that. It would have to be cataclysmic if all of a sudden Brian Thomas Jr. or, I mean, I could honestly see it with Keon Coleman. I don't want to go into that whole thing. I felt really good about him until basically combine time ish. But guys like that who are first round grades to some, those guys don't just all of a sudden magically become bums. Something clearly had to have gone wrong for that to happen. Your Gabe Davis, as an example, is not exactly apples to apples here. That's comparing an apple that just bloomed to one that's already red and ready to be picked. Like those are two different things here. So overall, anything they've done to this receiver room shouldn't dictate what you're looking at in receiver in the draft. It should be about, as we keep saying here, when you look down the road, when you understand what the position group looks like for years to come, it's going to get dry quick. They have a hole there or a need there that will continue to grow, and you just have such a great opportunity in front of yourself to just maybe do something about it with this upcoming draft.
Yeah, and a lot of people will say, well, they still have Justin Shorter. You don't know what he is. And that's true, but you don't want to only count on that as your one
Right.
young piece. I'd be okay if the Bills took 2 wide receivers personally.
Mm.
I think they have the room on their roster to do that. They throw the ball enough to get away with that. And I think we both have said it. The wide receiver is certainly going to be a focal point for this team on draft night. And I think we'll get strong consideration in round 1. And the board will certainly line up and should allow them to do that. Another position that folks have been very, very concerned with is defensive tackle. And up until this week, Luka, the Bills really only had 2 defensive tackles on their roster, Ed Oliver and then Daquan Jones, who they brought back a week and a half ago. They have Elianku on the practice squad, or I guess at this point it's considered like a reserve futures deal, not a true practice squad. And then this week they signed Austin Johnson from the Chargers, spent some time with the Giants. They've lost Tim Settle, and they still on the street from their roster last year, has not signed elsewhere, is Jordan Phillips and Linval Joseph. I think that Austin Johnson is actually a really solid backup. I think he can back up at the nose, which this team, I do think, has been 2 years in a row now. They were so lucky to get Linval Joseph last year, just so lucky. And then I think Austin Johnson provides that. I think he can give you a little bit of pass rush on the interior. I think he can back up both spots. I don't think it's like a third guy that's a starting level player, but I think he's a high end backup. But I feel a lot better about the defensive tackle depth because of Austin Johnson, Luka, because when you just looked how bare it was before they brought him back, and you have Daquan Jones off of a pretty serious injury, and then, you only have really 2 guys there. And I think Joe Marino said it best, that even if Ed Oliver played the most snaps in his career, 70%, let's say Daquan plays the most snaps of his career, 60, there's still 70% of the snaps that need to go to somebody. And Austin Johnson helps. Where do you rank defensive tackle on your needs list? I see a lot of folks on Twitter saying it should outrank receiver at this point. The way I'm looking at it, I see the Bills have defensive tackle 1, 2, and 3 already on their roster. And I understand the age concerns and the 1-year contract concern of Daquan Jones and then Austin Johnson 1-year contract respectively. But there's just no place in the world where I would say defensive tackle 4 is my top priority heading into the draft, unless the value is just too good to pass up.
So it's funny. I'm going to attack this a little bit differently, only because of a way you said something there right at the end, Josh. It's me attacking you right now.
Yes, bring it.
You said, I don't see a place where defensive tackle 4 is a priority or over receiver in the draft. The only reason I bring that up is because we keep beating the drum here. You don't draft on immediate need or anything like that. And if you're drafting a defensive tackle with a blue chip draft pick, it's not because you're drafting them for defensive tackle 4 in this moment in time. You're drafting them because you believe them to be hopefully a franchise interior defensive lineman for years to come. Attacking you a little bit for that comment, but that aside, everything else you said is very valid. Like interior defensive line, I will say, is not a priority over receiver with all things considered. Even it's one of those things where you could bring up the fact that Daquan Jones isn't getting any older or any younger. And the fact of the matter is, like, you need to figure out life beyond Daquan Jones because he's so vital to this defense and what they try to do. It's readily apparent every time he's been out. And it's like, we need to do something about that. Yes. So if there is something there, and then say all the receiver options that you could have as your future number one are no longer available, that would be a very good, kind of like fallback plan, we'll call it, if the opportunity is there to replace that one technique you could have as your man truly next to Ed Oliver for years to come, now that you have Ed Oliver locked up for the foreseeable future. But there is no world that is where the line ends. There's no world where that trumps wide receiver need in this draft. And it's all about the future. It's all about looking forward. And where you have it, if you want to try to argue that you want better depth this season, I will just stop you there immediately and go, that doesn't make sense. You don't draft in the first and second round for immediate need. You want those players to make an immediate impact. And the ironic part of it all is, if you're doing that with interior defensive line on this team, that is probably where you will see the impact the least, because you rotate too much. You do other things like that, where at the end of the day, even if they're blowing up, they're on a pitch count, they're on a snap count. And it's just, you're going to be one of the community, and therefore your impact will be limited. Whereas if you draft a Brian Thomas Jr., there's a massive hole there. I keep saying Brian Thomas Jr. If you draft that blue chip wide receiver in the first round, that hole is there for him to make more of an impact, because you're not going to take a guy, if he shows something with Josh Allen, you're not taking him off the field. That just would not happen. There was a reason that they basically force-fed Gabe Davis. It was like, Josh Allen clearly liked him. He was a good run blocker as well. And then on top of it, you knew he was a big play waiting to happen. You don't take those kinds of guys off the field. They're going to have to figure out something else now with that Gabe Davis piece gone. And if they draft something, there is a much better opportunity there, even in the immediate future, for the Bills to see what they have there. So I don't understand the logic of anyone even trying to talk themselves into interior defensive line being a bigger priority in the upcoming draft compared to, say, wide receiver.
And even looking at that future piece. So if there's a guy sitting there that you think, oh, he's a game wrecker and we can't pass up on him, like, if that's the case, if he just is head and shoulders sticking out on your board, you can't move back, yeah, take him. I don't really care what the position is at that point. Like, your scouts are paid to scout. My issue is the folks that are identifying defensive tackle as their primary need. And my question is, why? The the wide receiver issue is clear. They need more explosive plays now, but Stephon Diggs is going to be 32 going into next year. Curtis Samuel is basically on a 2-year deal you can get out of. He's going to be 29. Khalil Shakir has only 2 years left on his rookie deal. They need a number one of the future. It's 2023. You're not drafting a nose tackle in the first round. Ed Oliver is your 3 technique, your number 1 3 technique, your Batman of the future. He's 26 years old. You just gave him a mega deal. I can't imagine a world where the Bills are looking at this thinking that we're going to go into this draft to find somebody to replace Ed Oliver. So then what is it? Is it you're not going to put another 3 technique next to Ed Oliver? That's just not how football works. I'm not drafting a nose tackle in the first round. I would not do that. And then, so you're going to draft Ed Oliver's future backup? Like, no, if the value falls and there's a guy there that you're just like, holy cow, we have this guy rated as highly as we had Vita Vea, and he's just sitting there in the late 20s for us, we got to take him. Fine. Great. That's how the draft should work. But if you're going into that draft saying we have to get a defensive tackle because we only have Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, and Austin Johnson, and the cupboard is bare next year, you have 11 draft picks. Fill the cupboard with some of those third or fourth, you don't have a third, but fourth, fifth, sixth round picks. And then you have next off season. But Ed Oliver is your Batman of your defensive tackle. It is not an immediate need. I don't understand that, but let's slide out to edge. Edge to me is a sneaky need. They did lose Leonard Floyd. They kept AJ Epinesa, and we were both on board for both of those moves. And then Von Miller took a pay cut. Brandon Beane came out today and said that Greg Rousseau is probably going to get his 5th-year option picked up. He said he can't really think of a scenario where he wouldn't. Shaq Lawson is still a free agent. And then, they did sign Casey Toohill from the Washington Commanders. Interesting player. Kind of more, I mean, he has some interesting athletic traits. He played outside linebacker in college, but really looks more like a high effort guy, like gets a lot of his sacks because, just keeps the play alive, which is fine. You're talking about a fourth defensive end. But I think when you look at this edge group, Luka, unlike defensive tackle, where you feel like you have your Batman in Ed Oliver, you have your guy next to him in Daquan Jones, who, when healthy, he's going to do his thing. And then you have that third guy in Austin Johnson you feel great about. I don't know that this group right now has the Batman. That was supposed to be Von Miller. He sure looked like it before he tore his ACL. Looked nothing of the sort last year. There is a chance that even at his older age, he could come back a year removed from that injury and get a little closer to his self from 2 years ago. Gregory Rousseau, to me, has been on the brink of that for a couple of years. He is a very, very solid starter, but I don't know that he has entered that game record territory. And then AJ Epinesa, to me, is a kind of a luxury as a third defensive end, but I don't know that I consider him like a high-end starter. I think if he has to start for you, that's kind of baseline at best. I could see a scenario like I'm looking at this thinking I have an eye on edge. And I think if there's a guy there in the late 20s and the receivers don't make sense, I'm absolutely okay if the Bills go in there and they're like, we need to help our pass rush, not just now, but as Luka loves to say, for the future, because Von Miller could very easily go away soon. Gregory Rousseau is going into his fifth year option. AJ Epinesa came back, but he's not the guy. He's just the guy that plays next to the guys. So edge to me is a sneaky, sneaky need.
Edge is a fascinating one going into this draft. Edge is the wild card. It's funny because to me, this year's draft and where I feel about the Bills and going into it, following free agency and everything of that nature, it is almost carbon copy identical to how I felt last year. And last year, there were guys like Murphy out of Clemson and guys like that where I was like, these guys fit a profile that I could kind of see it where, depending on how the draft works, the Bills could take him and they could utilize a guy like him in their edge rotation and so on and so forth. When you look at this edge group, I love you bringing up the edge because it is one where you would like maybe another one in the cupboard. You would like another guy, and this is where you could have another pick like an AJ Epinesa and or like we're talking here, if you're late first round. And again, somewhat like what I said with interior defensive line, but I do kind of like the edge idea a little bit more for a lot of reasons that if your wide receiver one graded players are no longer available within your grasp, whatever you can do to get them, if depending on how the board worked out, you have guys like, I mean, I don't actually foresee this. I'm just going to throw out a name like a Chop Robinson, who's a little bit undersized, but he's still, and by undersized, it's like he's still 250 pounds, 6'3", and ran a 4.4 840. There's a reason that I don't believe him to be in the 20s, but all said and done. But overall, if someone like him falls, it's like, put him in the cupboard. Like, what are we doing here? Don't be stupid. Like, this could be someone that could flourish on the edge for this defense in a rotation when maybe when one game a Rousseau is working, the other one it's not, and you need a little bit more speed and you need a little bit more of an edge, and you bring in a Chop Robinson, which then he will have a teacher like a Von Miller, where Von Miller might not be very useful on the field, but off the field, I am sure he is a wealth of knowledge that a young edge defender that's a premium player could probably absorb as much as possible and be the better player than what he could be elsewhere. So it's just one of those things where edge is definitely one that it's a premium position. It is one that there's a reason it gets a lot of money around the league, that everyone needs them. And if push came to shove and the Bills found themselves in a position where they have this edge defender above anyone else available at the point of which they're picking, they're going to just take it. There's no reason you should complain about such a thing, both considering the now and the future, because the cupboard does have slots where you could put it and let it flourish for years to come. And I have no problem with that whatsoever, because even in this draft, if I go to look at that as well, there are some edge defenders in here, there's a weird mix. I will say there's a lot of there's a few high end edge defensive line / edge outside linebackers, and then there's a bunch of guys that kind of fit a similar mold in that later territory. That it's like I can see it if it's possible, but at the same time, once again, to finalize this point, it does not go over wide receiver. Like it just doesn't. Like wide receiver is the trump card, one of one. That should be priority one. But edge is an interesting one that I would definitely say on day 2, Josh. That is one where I could see the Bills understandably being a little bit aggressive with it.
Yeah. And I think, last year we did a draft live show, and you and Stokes, when the Bills traded up, now none of us were really thinking Kincaid at the time. We were all pleasantly surprised when it happened. We all kind of bought into the whole, like, they just paid Knox. I don't think they're going to go tight end. And then when they took Kincaid, we were like, oh, cool. Like we love Kincaid, but we just didn't see that coming. You and Stokes were like, Nolan Smith is falling ridiculously. And at this point, like, you still felt kind of good about Von Miller. He did have the ACL injury. Greg Rousseau looked good. You're like, just put Nolan Smith on the roster. We'll find a place for him. And I think that's kind of the same thought process here. Let's talk about cornerback before we talk about a couple other offensive positions. I think cornerback's another position, Luka, that could be a sneaky need on the Bills on even night 1, maybe night 2. And, it's one of those where it's like you look at the top 3 and you just feel great about it. It's the 3 that they ended the season with, unfortunately not in the playoffs. But Christian Benford, who has just been like found money in the couch cushion after the Bills took him in the 6th round, and he's done nothing but develop into a very, very solid starter. Only thing holding him back at this point is injuries. Rasul Douglas, who they got for pennies on the dollar at the trade deadline last year, is going into the last year of his deal, is going to be 30 years old before the season starts. And then Taron Johnson, who many feel is the best nickel cornerback in the league, is paid as such, just got an extension to make him the highest paid nickel corner in the league. He's going to be 28 when the season starts. And then behind them, they have former first-round pick Kyer Elam, and then a couple guys, Jamarcus Ingram and Kyron Brown. I think cornerback depth is interesting. They did lose Dane Jackson to Carolina, but I could see a scenario where if the Bills look at this and they're like, look, we've been waiting for Kyer Elam. At this point, we're not going to assume he's going to come on. Like, he's going to be in camp. He's probably going to make the roster because he has some really good athletic attributes. But what we don't want to do is put ourselves in a position where we are singling him out as, if Rasul Douglas moves on after this year, that's the guy that slides into his spot. Or if Christian Benford can't stay healthy, it's okay, we have Kyer Elam. I think the Bills do want to insulate themselves with something better at cornerback. There were some rumors out there that they were close to bringing back Levi Wallace. Those rumors were Levi Wallace's Instagram, where nothing has come to fruition yet. I would anticipate that's a move that does make sense for both sides. But I could see a scenario where Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, if they love a cornerback in this draft, they could talk themselves into the fact of put him in the pipeline. We love Christian Benford. Rasul Douglas is probably moving on after this year. And at this point, Kyer Elam is closer to a bust than a useful player. And if we get a guy, first round, I can see the Bills in the first round, if they have a cornerback sitting there that they have a strong grade on. And every position I'm talking about that's not receiver, I feel like I'm going to say this over and over again, Luka too. If receiver falls wrong, if receiver falls right, none of this else matters, because there's a lot of receivers. You need one, take one. If receiver falls wrong and there's a corner sitting there that you like, you take him and you put him there. And he's probably not seeing the field this year over those 3 guys, like, at all. Like, good luck cracking that starting lineup. But you have him ready to roll next year. He can maybe rotate in here and there. Christian Benford might get hurt, whatever. But I could see that being a need where the Bills, I don't know, first round seems kind of rich, but you never know how the draft's going to fall. And the Bills don't want to be short on cornerbacks.
Wide receiver, edge, corner, and quarterback, of course. Those are your 4 premium positions in football. There's a reason that they get paid the most. There's a reason that they're emphasized the most. And honestly, that's why all the elite athletes go to those positions now for the most part. There's outliers, of course. You see your Brock Bowers, your Dalton Kincaids playing tight end that are very, very good athletes. You have your James Cook types, your Saquon Barkleys that are supreme athletes at the running back position. Running back is an interesting one where no kid wants to play it these days because they understand what's going on in the market with that. But overall, those 4 positions I started with are your premium positions. So why not, if you have at any point a draft board fall in a certain way, you just take the best available offer or best available player in one of those 4 positions. We have highlighted how wide receiver is clearly the number one on our brains. It seems to be, based on some tea leaves, a very big priority for the Bills where they're doing their due diligence on the position. And it makes the most logical sense that that would be the avenue they go down. But as you said, and as we will probably say for the next month, Josh, if the board falls in a way, we can see other positions going. That's why we talked about edge in the way that we did. And now that we're at corner, it is that way as well. What I would say is corner in this year's draft, there's a few guys that kind of flip and stuff like that. You have a couple injuries as well, major injuries to very notable names out there. Your Kool-Aid McKinstry, and then more notably that is polarizing on the Twitter sphere and in NFL fandoms, Cooper DeJean. Those guys are coming off major injuries where you don't know truly where they slot. If one of those guys fall and the board falls away where you're not sure, and Brandon Beane had a first round grade on them, there is a world where they take them. I mean, that it wouldn't be out of the question, and it would make total sense, because what's better than having a first round grade on a guy who fell because of injury and you're actually comfortable at that position, where now a position of somewhat strength can get even stronger and you don't have to feel bound down by Rasul Douglas and needing to pay him to, keep it afloat for the next few years and or do whatever is needed. Now, I could see them still paying, Rasul Douglas, depending on how that goes. But overall, you have Christian Benford, you have Rasul Douglas, you have now another guy in the pipeline. It's like you are feeling fantastic. And then it wouldn't deter you still from taking a dart throw later on in the draft, potentially, of like Kyrie Jackson in this draft, which is going to be one that I know I am going to keep falling in love with just because of his size. But Josh may even want to just take a peek at this guy, because as much as we like Tariq Woolen, that is another one that seems to fit somewhat of a similar mold. Maybe not as fast, but everything else is basically the same. It's one of those things where corner is a fun one, and at no point should it ever deter. It should corner be a position that you are afraid to draft.
Right.
Like it doesn't matter where you are. Corner it's a needed position. It's a high end position. And at any point, if you take one because you like them, it makes sense.
Cooper DeJean is interesting for a lot of reasons. I would like the Bills to draft him because next time the Bills play the Chiefs, we can talk about Rashee Rice.
No, come on.
And I can say Cooper's going to be on him like white on rice.
No.
There's a lot of layers to that one. Anyway, yeah, I'm with you. I think I throw a tackle in there too, as far as like the 5 premium, but I think your point was more like the athletes tackles, but yeah, like those to me are the positions that if you aren't just like set for 10 years of that position, they're never off your draft board.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think cornerback is very much in play if certain things fall, mainly wide receiver not falling. Okay, let's spin it over to the offense. We've already talked about wide receivers a lot. Let's talk quickly about running back, because I do expect the Bills to draft a running back in this draft. They are light at running back right now. They only have James Cook and Ty Johnson and Darrington Evans on their roster. But I do think one lesson they learned last year is you can find a guy like a Ty Johnson on the street in the summer, and he can come in and do a bang up job for you in the regular season. He earned himself a second contract with the Bills doing that. Luka, I don't need the Bills to do what they did with Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, and then again with James Cook. Now, granted, James Cook was much more of we need a guy, like the number one guy. I don't need them like chasing the depth running back, but I could see a situation where they're like, okay, we have a couple of, jitterbug running backs and James Cook and Ty Johnson can catch the ball well out of the backfield. Maybe on day 3, rounds 4, 5, 6, 7, we find a guy that like is good value, is kind of a banger, like a goal line back, maybe kind of like the Latavius Murray mold, but like a younger version, obviously. I could see that, but I don't see any scenario where James Cook coming off of a Pro Bowl season, Ty Johnson looking like a very solid backup running back. I know there's some folks that think he's probably more of a running back 3. I don't think the Bills need to overextend themselves with only one day 2 pick to go out there and get a running back before Saturday.
Running back is one we've seen them draft running back on day 2 before and multiple times, and it's one of those things where it would be interesting to see how they handle it. But yes, what I am confident in believing is they will be coming out of this draft with at least one running back. I will say at least, only because when day 3 comes around, when you're in the 6th and the 7th rounds, you're just drafting guys. Who knows? Maybe there's a guy in the 7th round at running back after drafting, let's say, Audric Estime, a popular name in Bill circles I see out there once in a while because he is a physical force out of Notre Dame. So, of course, you have the Notre Dame aspect where a lot of people have watched him, and he is kind of that thunder to a lightning situation that is James Cook.
He's huge, right? Like huge. Am I thinking of the right Notre Dame back?
Yeah, he's 5'11", but still 221 pounds. Yeah,
yes,
he's a big boy.
I watched him at Notre Dame. Yes, I like him.
Yeah, a lot of people like him.
He plays to his size.
Yeah, he is tough to get down. He is a big SOB. He is fun to watch. As someone that watches Notre Dame on the very regular, Josh, I watched Estime, and it's like wherever he ends up, he will be fascinating in fantasy football terms, stuff like that, because even though he is that big kind of dude, like he can run and he's hard to tackle, and it seems like he could be productive in the pro level. You can't be that big and strong and not be productive at the pro level. It would be shocking. But then there's other guys like Braylon Allen, maybe a name you haven't heard, 6'1", 235, runs a 4.4. He's a big power back that can run. He also fits a mold that I could see the Bills taking. Those are 2 guys, though, that you're looking at your late day 2, even maybe early day 3, depending on the draft board and how things work, that, yeah, it would make a ton of sense for the Bills to take. You get them on a fixed wage. They're controlled for the next 4 years of their career. And you do have another body that's young and complementary to the James Cook experience that you have already in the backfield that you should feel very comfortable with. And then Ty Johnson on top of it, where I will say I am under the impression he really is kind of that, you need a breather situation with your primary 2 guys. Here's your third one, who there shouldn't be a huge drop off. There's a drop off from a James Cook, but we're talking about James Cook here, like, a guy who all purpose yards was top 5 in the league. So it's just a situation where, yes, those are the kind of guys. I'm not expecting them to go out and draft a Will Shipley, we'll say, or, something like that, where you're just getting another of a like. If they do that, I would imagine there's an idea of what they're trying to achieve. But also at the same time, I mean, I don't know if they're necessarily going to go for a Blake Corum type guy, someone that I could see maybe making a late surge up the draft board, or definitely a guy like Jalen Wright or Jonathan Brooks out of Texas, Jalen Wright out of Tennessee, where those are guys I can easily see a world where all of a sudden you have a team that's like looking at it late second, and they're going to just snatch these guys up, if not trade up a couple spots to get them, because they're pretty dynamic. They seem to be the best available in this current draft. Like Jalen Wright, Josh, he is just under 6 foot and he's over 200 pounds. He ran a 4.38. It's like, oof, that would be a fun tool to have. But those are the kind of guys that I wouldn't expect the Bills to be in play for, because you imagine there's going to be teams that want them to be a true, let's see what we can get out of these guys, maybe early day 2. And realistically, it just doesn't feel like something that the Bills will go for, where late day 2, early day 3, you get your Estime, your Allen type, someone that is a true power force for this offense that can be complementary. Something that they've shown in free agency last year, they thought they might have gotten with Murray and or Harris, stuff like that. Like, you're trying to get that kind of guy in this offense, and now you're just going to go through the draft in order to achieve that, now that you have a decent chunk of draft capital to achieve it.
They do have a decent chunk of draft capital. I can't remember the last time the Bills went into a draft this loaded. And I think the way it's looking this offseason, Brandon Beane is playing another round of comp pick bingo very well. I think that they should get another compensatory pick next year. The last position I want to talk about, Luka, before we get to some tweets we got from some listeners, is offensive line. And we'll just kind of group all these together because the Bills lost some names this offseason by choice. They traded away Ryan Bates to Chicago, and then they cut Mitch Morse in a cap savings move that many of us were kind of surprised that they did. But I think that was one of those, you have to do this to not have to tap into Stephon Diggs or Von Miller's restructure. So now what the Bills starting offensive line looks like is really 4 of the 5 same guys from last year, where you have Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown at tackle. Connor McGovern moves from left guard to center. And then you still have Osiris Torrance at right guard. And then at left guard, it's going to be a competition. David Edwards slotted in there now. They did sign Will Clapp from the Chargers. Amazing name. And then they have a couple young guys we know they're high on. Alec Anderson, they've been grooming him for a couple years. Ryan Vandemark, a guy that has been around for a couple years and really earned that tackle 3 job last year. Tommy Doyle coming off of another injury. I don't have a whole lot left in the hope tank for him, but I know he's a name that folks continue to bring up, and I understand that. I do think that the Bills have a need here. And not just because it's an important position group, but a need here to insulate the interior. I like David Edwards. I think David Edwards is a fine starting guard. But what the Bills don't have this year that they had last year was a luxury of guys in David Edwards and Ryan Bates ready to come in if an injury happened and you feel like you still had a starting level player coming in. Now, look, this is a team up against the cap. You can't necessarily have that. That's where you need Aaron Cromer to develop guys like Alec Anderson into those depth pieces. And that's what the Bills are gambling on. But Luka, I fully expect the Bills to have an eye, particularly on the interior, about finding somebody who can help them maybe from a depth perspective this year, or, push David Edwards for a starting job. But then going forward, being on that rookie deal, when you see some of the crazy contracts guards got this offseason, Robert Hunt from the Dolphins getting that mega deal.
Yeah.
It's like Robert Hunt. And I think that the Bills, if they could get another guy on a cheap rookie deal, they would absolutely love to. And if the talent lines up, I absolutely could see the Bills going interior offensive line as early as round 1 and also round 2. Not both, but like one of those 2.
I think the Robert Hunt signing was a David Tepper special. I
Yeah.
think that's really what that was. I think that's him in what seems to be his classic fashion, although it's short-lived at this point that he's owned. I think we're already starting to get a profile of the type of owner he is. One that cares, clearly, for negative or positive reasons, depending on what you've seen of him. But then he's overreacting, we'll call it, to trying to fix something that maybe can't be fixed. Not to have a Panthers podcast here, but you have Bryce Young and now you're trying to protect him. And so you just blow your load on as much as you possibly can on the offensive line, and you are overpaying to do so. But back to offensive line, and primarily, I will say in this case, interior offensive line. I could see the Bills. I don't know if I necessarily see interior, at least this year, in the first round. Tackle is one, as you even mentioned, is definitely a premium position in the league that if there's a tackle you like and the way it works out, as we keep saying, it would make sense in the first round, but definitely in day 2. Day 2 is one where I find it very interesting in this year's draft, as well as just what the Bills have themselves in, where it's like, I see guys out there. The name I'm just going to randomly throw out there, to be quite honest, is one where I look at it, I go, this would be interesting. Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia. He is an interesting center that it's one where I watched him and I was like, man, day 3 would make, or a third round, day 2. You look at him and you go, I don't know how things are going to break down by that point, but he's got a little bit something to him that you're fascinated by. And now with the Bills being in a situation where a depth center or someone that you could maybe have be the future of that position moving forward could be needed, you look at him and you go, yeah, if you're sitting there in the second round and things really didn't work out the way you like, so you're probably trading back at that point. But
Right.
And then you're in the third round and now you're there because you traded back and you have this Van Pran just sitting there, Van Pran, however it says, I'm not sure, but he is a fascinating prospect that you could see sitting there and you're like, yeah, he has the potential with his athleticism to be a center in this league that it's worth taking a shot on. And I can see a world where the Bills take a center like him. Or if Jackson Powers Johnson, my favorite center in this year's draft, probably a lot of people's draft, he seems to be potentially an early day 2 guy. But if he falls, the Bills taking an interior offensive lineman, primarily center, someone that's played the position in college, makes all the sense in the world after what we've seen this offseason. You know, they're already going to be experimenting a little bit with that center position, of course. So then doing something in the draft where you can potentially get the next center for this offense and for Josh Allen, that then you can control the wage of, and then see what you can do with the market at that point with interior offensive line. And hopefully people understand that what Tepper did was just an overreaction and not a market set trend that needs to continue. Which by the way, I feel like has already happened a little bit with wide receiver contracts, that you still see the random spikes like what we saw with Jerry Jeudy, which is wild. But then it's like, I felt like Gabe Davis contract where people are building more outs and things like that. It's almost like the overreaction that was Christian Kirk and then eventually AJ Brown and Tyreek Hill's contracts. There might have been a little bit of a dip back down where they're more manageable and reasonable. Still a lot more than what it was 5 years ago. But back to the offensive line point, hopefully it doesn't cost too much 4 years down the road. But at this point in time, if you draft an interior offensive lineman with the hopes of maybe this center, say your Jackson Powers Johnson or your Zach Frazier or your Cedric Van Pran, those kinds of guys, if you draft that individual, it makes a lot of sense in the world, because let's say whatever they end up doing in the interior line going into the season is not working under center. Maybe the center exchange is just a disaster. You just need to get someone that's comfy with the position under center with Josh Allen, and hopefully that works. And if it's not at that point, well, then you need to reevaluate things and you really screwed up. But overall, it makes a lot of sense to take that second or third round pick, depending on, obviously, again, they don't have a third, correct, Josh? If I right?
Yeah, they don't have a
Yeah,
third, but
but
I'm with
I
you.
keep saying that if the board doesn't work and they trade
Mhm.
back, that day 2 spot makes a lot of sense for interior offensive line.
I think they're going to wind up with a third. I really do. There's no shot Brandon Beane is going to let the entire third round go by with 9 day 3 picks in his pocket, 2 fourth round picks. He's going to fall in love with somebody. He gets itchy, and this is a team that I don't think can roster 11 rookies. So I'm with you. They're going to, and it's interesting. And this is maybe another conversation for another day, but we talked a lot about the wide receiver draft class, and you mentioned some of the wide receiver second contracts have been a little lighter, and the studs are always going to get paid, right? Like the Justin Jefferson when he gets paid, CeeDee Lamb, like those guys are gonna get paid. They deserve it.
Yeah.
But what we saw a couple years ago was like the mid-level guys really starting to get paid. And you're right, it's kind of reverse course back. I think teams are finally realizing, like, why am I going to pay Jacoby Myers, who's a nice player, when you see the Chiefs got Rashee Rice in the second round, making like $1 million a year, or Puka Nakua now for the Rams. I mean, these receivers are coming all rounds. They're just ready to, they come into the league, hit the ground running. Luka already mentioned that the best athletes on offense are now playing receiver. You have them in all rounds of the draft coming in, ready to hit the ground running, unless their name's Quentin Johnston, and they are ready to help their team out and contribute in a big way. The Bills saw it a little bit with Khalil Shakir's rookie year, and then he stepped into a big role last year. And I think that's really the market reset we're seeing, is that teams are like, why am I going to pay so much for a guy that was above average when I can just draft a couple guys and probably get even better than that? Luka, we put a question out on Twitter, much like the topic of this show. What is the Bills' biggest draft need now that the majority of free agency is complete? What do you view as the Bills' number one priority? Let's go through some of these answers. I think some of it is going to be a lot what we said. Getting diggy with it, one of our favorites on Twitter. I really want a receiver. However, Brandon and his team know more than I do, so I'll let them do what they do and not get mad if they don't take one. LOL. I respect that. At the end of the day, Disney wife is right. We have no control over this, so there's really no need to get too upset about it. But we will, because it's what we do. We love this team. Buffalo over everyone. Whatever happens at rounds 1 and 2, I just want Bean to take the best available at the position, hopefully wide receiver, safety, or defensive end, in that order. And safety's a position you definitely mentioned, Luka. And then wide receiver, defensive end, we talked about quite a bit. Another one of our favorites, Matthew Rose, a future wide receiver one. I definitely echo that. And then this one is the one I wanted to maybe talk about a second. Bills Mafia 27. We should still go wide receiver early. I feel like safety should be addressed somewhere in the first 3 rounds too. I would like to see wide receiver and then load up on defense in the draft. Luka, I respect where Bills Mafia 27 is coming from. I really do. I see this a lot. I think it's a bad idea to go into any draft thinking we're going to load up on offense, we're going to load up on defense. Now look, you could do your draft board and you could just look at the draft and say, "Oh man, the talent in this draft is on the defensive side of the ball. So we're going to wind up with more defensive players just because that's what this crop of college kids looks like." I don't necessarily think it's good business for the Bills to say, we really got to just put some guys in the pipeline on defense. And I think you can point to some recent examples where they take a Dorian Williams when you're like, why are you taking a Dorian Williams? That doesn't make any sense. You just took a Terrell Bernard. Or where they take a Zach Moss and they had just taken a Devin Singletary. Like, they are sticking to their board. And whether they're right or wrong, they take a Boogie Basham 1 round after taking a Gregory Rousseau. I don't think they go into this draft thinking we need to just load up on defense, Luka. But I do understand like his concern of, wow, we just saw a bunch of guys that were the face of this defense leave. Hyde, Poyer, Tre'Davious White. Next year, you could see Rasul Douglas be right behind them. Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips, maybe to a lesser extent, are gone. Tremaine Edmonds left last year. It feels like maybe you need some future pipeline studs on that defense. You're hoping that Benford and Oliver and who am I forgetting? Bernard can be like your 3 stalwarts on defense going forward. But I don't know. To me, I never go into a draft thinking the Bills need to definitely address this side of the ball, picks rounds 1 through 7.
No, it feels like a broken drum at this point. It's just one of those things where you never need to be tunnel vision, or you never have to predetermine what you're doing going into the draft. The board is going to break down however it's going to break down. And what you need to do and what the responsibility and the job is of the GM, the scout staff, everyone involved, is to create a big board of which you stick to. There's no position basis off of it or anything like that. Because as we keep saying, this is truly about best player available, what's the best way to utilize what you have at hand. And essentially, if you need to correct these positions, in all honesty, what you can do is you look at these players as assets. And if push comes to shove and you really need someone out there, you use whatever that is as your resource to then trade for or get however you need to something else out there on some other team and in some other fashion. Like, the draft is not the place to address a side of the ball or anything specifically. That is something you should be doing primarily outside of the draft. The draft is strictly something of which you go into and you just try to get best players available at all times, with your blue chip stuff, your first and second rounds, maybe being a point of emphasis where this is something that we really see an issue down the road, on top of also something that it could be an instant impact. So therefore, we're going to go that route. That is where the only change may be. Once you get past those first couple rounds, though, that then you would just, the defense conversation, the offensive conversation, any of that goes to the wayside. That's secondary, if not worse, or down the road more so. You just draft the best players you see, and then you take it from there.
I like Jim Wicken's idea. This is the last one we'll go with. All pro players at any position.
Wow.
I mean, hey,
if only it was that
put
simple.
him in the draft room. I appreciate it. That's a good way to end it. And that is where we're going to end it, Luka. The next time we talk, it will be April, and we will be knee deep in this draft conversation. We are going to dedicate our next episode to talking all about the pass catchers, the wide receivers the Bills can target in the first round, in the second round. If things go wrong, who are some wide receivers they can target on day 3 of the draft? We're going to have you covered top to bottom. Luka's going to bring up his big board a lot. He's put a lot of work into that. I am going to get aggressive in watching some of these guys. I've been watching receivers quite a bit, and then I'm trying to take in all the content I can. As you could tell earlier when I was like, is that the Notre Dame guy? Because I have not done a lot of work on running backs. That's how little I think the Bills are going to be invested in running backs. By the time the draft rolls around, I'll have every position taken care of. I'll know the main quarterbacks, obviously, but outside, I'm not going to do a lot of work on the depth quarterbacks. But Luka, we have finally made it. Our last episode of March. We turned the calendar over to April. We are in the second quarter of the year. And then the draft will be here before we know it. It's the best time of the year, isn't it, as far as the off season goes?
Drafts, right? April is all about the draft, and you lead up to the draft, and it's draft season. We have our, we'll be doing a draft live stream. Spoiler alert. Again, we'll be doing all that fun stuff. That's the great time. And then right when you turn that page, Josh, it's all about what is the season going to look like? When are we playing Arizona, for instance? I will have my eye on, because then I will probably be trying to figure out how I'm going to that game. So on and so forth. That's the next step. And next thing you know, we'll be talking about training camp and all that stuff. But I'm not trying to rush ahead, because April is a fantastic time of the NFL season. Fantastic time for myself. I love it so much. And I'm so happy that we are here.
And I will just tell you all a lesson from Uncle Josh here. Do not wish months away. Do not. I used to be that person that'd be like, okay, when the draft's over, it just needs to be September. Like, get me football. It's like, folks, we have some beautiful summer weather out there. Luka's going to be taking a fun trip coming up. Like, go live your life. Football will be here before you know it. But there is a lot of fun stuff coming up this summer. If you're an NBA fan, NBA playoffs. If you're a baseball fan, baseball's coming up. March Madness is going on right now. If you're a soccer fan, you can always catch that. Luka, that might have something to do with your trip. Spoiler alert. So yeah, just live your life. Football will be here before you know, but don't wish the years away, because man, they go by fast. Anyway, speaking of going by fast, this off season's gone by fast, and this episode went by fast. But we'll be right back here next week for Luka. I am Josh McCarty. We will see you next week when we go over all the wide receivers in this draft class on Bills Chat. We'll see you then.